again. Welcome to Content 360 Supersession. The topic of this session is connecting to tomorrow's audiences. Obviously, with the advent of multi-platform devices and consumer being connected everywhere, even in the cloud, everything in your pocket, the connected consumer, but how do you connect to them? How do you engage them with your new content? And what new content forms will engage this audience? And what's beyond, what's social TV, what's beyond apps? And what's the increasing role of technology? Is that going to play a more and more important role? These are the questions that will be covered in this session. I hope you'll enjoy it. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers. The session is divided into three small parts. The first part is a featured presentation from Kevin Slavin. Second part is a keynote panel, which will be joined by three leaders of content on stage with Kevin to discuss how we're connecting to tomorrow's audiences. And the third stage is three very cool technology demos in terms of interfacing and engaging with content. How does new interfaces impact connecting to tomorrow's audiences? So I hope that you'll enjoy the session. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce Kevin Slavin. Welcome on stage, Kevin. Kevin is, please give him a big hand of applause. Kevin is the co-founder of Area Code, and which is now Zynga. He's obviously a pioneer in social games, but he's also a pioneer in overall social TV, thinking of TV interaction. So without further ado, I'll leave the stage to you, Kevin. I'll go over there. Thank you.
Okay. Can we get the...
You have your microphone?
Microphone. And get some sound coming out of that. Hi, everybody. So the talk is called The Character of the Audience. And this is the part where I tell a joke of some kind, and it's met with crickets. And crickets, I don't know if it translates outside the United States. Crickets is designated, it's almost a term of art, in particular within television, to refer to that moment of silence, for example, after a failed joke, when there is no applause, when there is no laughter, when there's that kind of nervous nothing sound in which you hear the crickets in the field. And I was thinking about this recently because I was actually reading about crickets. This guy, kind of a freak, I say in a loving way, John Himmelman, who has spent most of his time just listening to those crickets. And he talks about it, he says, the book was inspired by the chapter about a young boy who was lulled to sleep at night by the songs of crickets. He and his father set out to capture them and bring them into the boy's room, where the calls would take on the role often relegated to a radio or television. The role relegated to television. And what role is that? Because crickets in your room is not obviously awesome entertainment. Their role within that. But they do, in a way, what television does, in that what they do is they kind of fill the void, right? That it is in fact not the sound of silence. It is in fact the sound of all of these crickets in this conversation with each other, if you can actually find a way to pay attention to it. Because the silence underneath that is the actual kind of enemy of television. And it's this thing of looking for something to fill the void. And you can see it, you know, television abhors that vacuum. This is a genre of video that you can find on YouTube, a favorite genre, in which the laugh track for American television has been removed, has been stripped out. So here's Friends.
Ross, thank you. Oh. Hey, do you guys want to go see a movie?
Oh, yeah, why not?
Yeah, Phoebes? No, thanks, I've already seen one. I'm gonna get my sweater.
Okay.
Crickets. You know, it's as if it was written by Beckett, right? It's really hard to watch. And you realize how much of television was actually designed to create these holes to put something into. And the thing that we were putting into it was this, right? Was the laugh box, right? Invented by Charlie Douglas in 1950, right? This machine, this actual machine about the size of this podium, you know, strapped to a luggage cart and wheeled around from studio to studio, $100 per show, where Charlie would watch the shows that looked like what we just saw and sit there and play it like an organ, drawing out an audience that wasn't really there, an audience made up mostly of dead people by the time they'd made it to tape here, and to play that to give us the sense not just that the show was real, but that we were real, that the thing that television had left behind, the audience, was actually there the whole time. And this is how we do it. This machine, this kind of like coffin being wheeled around. And, you know, we called it the laugh track, we call it the laughing audience, laugh in a can. LFN was the acronym. My favorite term of art for this, laughter from nowhere. Because, you know, for 60 years, we faked it, right? For 60 years, we faked the audience, right? The audience was out there, 10 million people at a time, all seeing it, but not together. And so something had to bring us together, and so we made that machine to do that. And then we've made all these other machines since then, but in the meantime, you know, in that moment, right, in that moment, at the height of the laughter from nowhere in the 50s, 1956, two psychiatrists, Donald Horton and Richard Wohl, phrase what they call parasocial relationships. So parasocial relationships, they are, I'll just sum it up. It's basically the relationships that we have with personae, with characters or personalities who don't know that we are alive. Maybe because they're not alive, right? Maybe because they're just a character on a screen, right? The parasocial refers to the ways that we invest those relationships with all the qualities that were normally reserved for, like, I don't know, people that we know and see every day and actually have conversation with. And that parasocial relationships were beginning to define our relationship to mass media, they talked about in the 50s. And it led to psychiatric disorders, something called delusions of reference. This is one of the list of things if you're looking to see if somebody can be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Have you ever seen things in magazines or TV that seem to refer to you or to contain a special message for you? Right? This idea of like the parasocial brought all the way, like where you actually feel like that character on TV does have some relationship with you. That would make you crazy. And like most things originally classified as psychosis, this has become, you know, mass culture. And the thing that's happening is that the 21st century version of the parasocial, right? If that's what was happening in the 50s, through, say, the 90s. The 21st century version of that is about to get really weird, right? If you thought that was weird, it's about to get really weird. Because what's happening now is that the audience itself, like you, all of you, well, not you, you guys make TV, but them, all of them, have a character, right? So what you see here is a friend of mine who watches the Super Bowl, as most everybody watches the Super Bowl, or a lot of TV, which is with the TV on one screen and Twitter over there on the left. So he's watching, and so what he's watching is what you're seeing here, a New York Times visualization. This is the character of the United States responding to what's happening in the Super Bowl, right? These are all the tweets located by time and location. Right? So now the United States of America is no longer invisible to the viewer. Right? So now there's the show, there's the viewer, and then there's this other character, which is all of us. And it is now visible. And that changes things. It produces a kind of character of the audience. Right? And what I'll argue is that there's 4 ways that this is sort of becoming distinct. The audience as a character. There's the idea that characters actually become the audience, which is super weird and really kind of new. 3, where the audience themselves start to embody characters. And finally, where the audience are individual characters. Not like what the United States thinks, but what individual people think. So this first one, you know, the idea of the audience as a character is in its own way kind of old, right? I mean, we're kind of familiar with it, right? The idea that what's going to happen on Idol is determined in part by the aggregate character of the United States or the UK or Russia or what have you, right? Where all of a sudden that is an additional character and I'm aware of that and maybe I'm a part of that, but that there's like somebody who's not on screen that's made up of all of us, right? And you see that there, and you see that with a lot of visualizations with Twitter. And this is kind of a gimme. We're all familiar enough with this right now. But this is where it starts to get really interesting, is where the characters themselves become the audience, right? And so this was with Anthony Bourdain, No Reservations, on the Travel Channel. A friend of mine, Kenyatta, helped sort of make this happen. And so basically, during the broadcast of No Reservations, which is by no means live, but during the canned broadcast of it, Anthony Bourdain came on Twitter and was in there, in the audience, with everyone. And you can see those little dots at the bottom are points where they told people, all they did was just throw a burn onto the screen that said, he's tweeting live now. And every time they did that little white thing, you see the spark jump, you know, right? It's like electrified, you know, so that you get hundreds of messages a minute. Because what are they doing when they're on Twitter at that time, right? What they're doing is they're actually in some weird dialogue. They're in a room talking with Anthony Bourdain about what Anthony Bourdain is doing. Okay, so that's this idea of the parasocial. You know, it's like this idea that that somebody on television, you know, what used to be used as clinical diagnostic. Do you feel like somebody on television has something special to say to you? The answer now might be maybe, right? You know, because he is responding to people, and that actually changes what it means to watch. It changes the condition of watching. It changes the sense of what is happening on the screen as surely as it changes the sense of what's happening in life. And we've done this with Starling, the platform that we've built and are building. We've done this with another show on the Travel Channel called Ghost Adventures, where we had people from the show, personalities from the show, who would actually enter the room, and it is electrifying. It's electrifying to be having a conversation about what you're seeing, and then have somebody from what you're seeing actually in there with you, right? And they really are, as surely as they might be in the room, because the room can have millions of people in it now. The third way is, rather than the characters sort of becoming the audience, is where the audience themselves start to take on the characters. And some of this looks sort of fringy, but the numbers are scary. So what you see over on the right is Glee role-playing on Tumblr. And if you don't know what Tumblr is, you should get a computer and check it out. But what they're doing is blogging, basically. And they're casting. What you see up on the right is they're casting for different people who watch Glee to take on that persona from Glee and start blogging as them, right? And so all of the characters of Glee are basically blogging. There's thousands of iterations of this, right? Thousands of casts that have been cast, totally from the ground up. And then over on the left, you see the same basic impulse, same basic behavior, of course, when Mad Men characters started appearing on Twitter. This is especially interesting. The Mad Men characters who were tweeting got it hit pretty critical mass, and then was sort of shut down, and then it was brought back. This is from a company called Brand Fiction Factory that will sort of do that for you, that will take the characters and put them online and extend their narratives through Twitter, so that those characters appear in the world of all of your friends, et cetera, so that they have the very same qualities of everyday life that your friends have, the sense that your friends are also actually living their lives as the characters of Mad Men do. But one of the things that's interesting is that the company, Brand Fiction Factory, says, to date, over 90 Twitter accounts have been opened in the name of Mad Men, and we control 17 of them. And it's like, oh, well, so who controls the other ones? And that's, of course, the audience themselves, right? That in fact, you couldn't even stop this if you wanted to. The idea that characters are going to seep out and actually start to take on the everyday communication qualities of everyday communication is unstoppable. You can't put it in a box. But the last part, I think, is sort of the weirdest part. And it's the part that's just beginning to happen now. And it changes a lot. it doesn't necessarily seem like that great a shift, but I'll argue that it's a really big deal. What you see here are just two notes about how American Idol started doing its voting through Facebook and how X Factor will be doing its voting through Facebook. Okay, what's the difference between voting through Facebook and voting with your phone by text message? The difference is that when you vote on Facebook, that is a public action, right? And that what you are doing when you declare fandom and support is now entered into the public sphere, right? It is now the way that many people will even hear about my preferences, right? This thing that used to be private between me and the show in that weird little parasocial relationship in which I could actually kind of invest something, unclear exactly what I'm getting back, except we all know what you get back, right? But now it goes a little bit further because what I'm doing is I'm investing that into everybody I know, right? And everybody who knows me. Right? And something changes there. It's where the audience itself starts to get high resolution, right? Where it's not just the idea of what the United States wants, right? It's what my friend Declan wants. It's what my friend Sarah wants, right? It's what people want. And that changes things. And so, for example, if you go to Conan O'Brien's page, you'll see the fan wall. And what they're doing is they're scraping everything that anyone is saying about Conan O'Brien. They're scraping the Twitter avatar, and they're pulling those up real time. So that what you're looking at when you're looking at Conan O'Brien online isn't just Conan O'Brien. You're looking at everybody looking at it in detail, like with faces and like with names and like easy to contact, right? And so now the relationships that we have that used to be classified as parasocial start to become applied to people, like real people, you know? And that's what's strange, right? It's like once we start to interlace like who we are and what we love, right? The idea of the parasocial starts to distort and fall apart. And ultimately, our parasocial relationships are going to be with the audience itself, right? We're going to have a sense that we know all of the people who also support who we are supporting on X Factor. We're going to have a sense that we know the people who are role-playing with us as other persona on Glee, right? Something shifted where the audience itself has become a character and part of our lives. At Starling, this is sort of like, this is mostly what we think about and work on all day, every day. We're working with MTV in particular. This was with skins, and what you see is this is the second screen. One of the things that's interesting about when you look at second screen output is it looks kind of boring and dull and slow, and that's sort of the point, right? Because what you're doing when you have a second screen up is you're watching television, right? And that the model for what this has to be something that rewards attention without ever demanding it. And I look at all the stuff for second screen that's just like, oh, and you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this, except that I'm watching television, right? And so the question is, what's the smallest, most rewarding thing that we can do? And so there's a couple things that we've been doing with Starling. The three things that I just want to say, partly because we've been doing them with Starling, but partly just in terms of just thinking about how to design for parasocial media. The first thing is figuring out how do you structure all those conversations. There's 27 different hashtags for Glee. Are you going to follow all of them? Are you going to follow one of them? Which language is that going to be in, right? So the first sort of order of business is figuring out where is that conversation going to take place and what is the shape of that and how do we give that some shape so that it's meaningful to the audience, to the producer, to the broadcaster, to everybody within it. The second thing is the threshold of attention. So you'll see, let's see, you'll see here, this is a show that you may or may not have heard of called The Game. It does typically 25,000 tweets per minute. Okay, 25,000 tweets per minute, right? You probably can't read all of those, right? You definitely can't read all of those if you are, for example, watching television at the same time, all right? So the problem is not how do we get 25,000 tweets. The problem is how do we figure out which messages we can filter through that are going to be meaningful to you or you or you, because the audience should be different for each of you because it has different qualities, different characters. And so part of what we're doing is really figuring out how do we build that character of the audience in a way that you can relate to it. And the last thing is really that the overall sensibility of the second screen entertainment that we're looking at and the second screen interaction should feel a lot less like an operating system, a lot less like RSS, a lot less like email, and more like TV, right? It should have the expressive qualities of television. It should feel like it's chunking off of the primary screen because that's what it's there to do. So, so in that space, right, that we used to think of as empty, right, crickets, we're basically making media, as we always have been, that shapes relationships. The difference is that those used to be with characters and personalities, and now the relationships that we're shifting and forming are with the audience itself. And what we're building now are systems to provide interaction for people, not just with the show, but with each other. And that is the most interesting and extraordinary challenge in front of us. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Thanks very much, Kevin. That's fantastic. Have a seat. And at this point, may I invite our keynote panelists up on stage as well? I will introduce them one by one. Gary Carter, Chief Creative Officer of FMX and Chief Operating Officer of FremantleMedia. Bruno Patino, Director General and Digital of Strategy, France Télévisions. And Tom Perlmutter, President of National Film Board of Canada and Government Film Commissioner. And welcome all. And thank you, Kevin, for that fantastic thought piece that you provided us. And I'd like to open up a discussion. Perhaps the best way to start is, actually, first way to start is two things. One, congratulations to Tom Perlmutter, National Film Board of Canada, for winning an interactive Emmy last night for the nonfiction.
Thank you.
And then, secondly, thank you both to FremantleMedia and NFB for supporting Content 360 so wholeheartedly this year. And thank you for all our jury members, including Bruno and speakers and other speakers, to be here. So I just wanted to say that. Now, Kevin, you provided a fantastic thought piece in terms of how we interact with that audience for next year. But I would love for Gary, Bruno, and Tom to comment on what your thoughts are in what Kevin said and what you think will be our way of connecting to tomorrow's audiences. Maybe a couple minutes from each of you.
Is this on? Yeah. Good morning. Underlying what Kevin has said, I think, is the destruction of a myth that we as traditional television makers have clung to for a very long time. And that is that in some way our audience has been passive. And this idea of so-called couch potatoes, which is very prevalent in the industry that I come from, is in my view a complete misunderstanding of the function of the media that we produce. So you only have to reflect back on your own experience to understand, if you're my age, for example, that one of the things that you do through the consumption of media is to create meaning and meaningful relationships with those around you. So do you remember the time, Kevin, we used to get together every week to watch 30-something? And do you remember how much we used to fight about blah, blah? And I used to watch, I don't know, The Price is Right with my grandmother all the time, and I miss her like hell. That construction of meaning, that construction of the depth and the finesse of relationship often comes as a surprise to television producers. One of the things when I was at Endemol that surprised the producers of Big Brother was that one of the primary things that audiences did with Big Brother was to make relationships with each other. It seems to me that what has happened from that period, and with the advent largely of broadband internet, is that technology has been able to extend the natural desire that we have to create that kind of meaning. So for us as content producers, the challenge is not, I think, to create content that audiences will engage with, because frankly, there's no sign that they really want to engage with it in the way we mean when we say that. The challenge is to create content that they will engage through, and that they will engage with each other through, if you'll forgive my syntax. And what we're seeing is the rise of technology that is enabling that simple and very traditional human function.
Fantastic. And Bruno, what's your thought?
Well, it's
It was a really brilliant presentation, and I absolutely agree with which was what said. The problem is I mean, our role has always been to create content that you can engage through. I would just add something to the really brilliant presentation that was said. One of the new thing is also that before you used to engage through the content, let's say, at the same time, in the same place. You know, it was kind of theatrical rule where you would all meet in the living room, look at the same TV set, and you would engage through the content at the same time, at the same place. And nowadays, you can engage through the content at different places, at different time. So this is also something new that has happened. I mean, all what we've seen, I mean, the characters becoming the audience and the audience becoming the character, and this is really true, but something has added up. You have to manage different time and different place. And this is the whole new thing for me that is brought by so-called connected TV, is you have also to manage people at different places and different time. And this is a whole new business.
Very good point. Very interesting. Tom?
Well, I found it really interesting, and particularly thinking about it in relation to some of the work we do, which is original interactive nonfiction, where you're engaging with characters who are also audience per se, given the fact that it is nonfiction. And the program that won the Emmy last night, for example, called Out My Window, and it's based on the notion that more than half the world lives in urban centers, and most of that, in fact, are in high-rise towers. And so we kind of constructed, through certain cities around the world, this ability to engage in that kind of original interactive work. It's not a second screen, it's the primary screen, where you into lives in an interesting and different way. So now you're engaging in reality as opposed to the characters and personalities, and your perceptions of the world begin to shift and change in interesting kind of ways. But you're still doing some of the things that you do, because it is still narrative. It's still about kind of creating forms of storytelling, which leads me to the other thing that we're exploring in all of this. And again, because it has to do with thinking of it as not simply an adjunct, the second screen, or a platform for the distribution of existing type content, but it's these are media that demand their own form, their own language, their own modes of creation as art forms. So that's the other part that drives a lot of that, and always with art, it is always, as you say, Gary, about creation of meaning and the sense of relationship and how you construct it. I mean, in terms of television, it was always the case, as you said. I mean, there were interesting studies when Dallas was, you know, the big hit everywhere, of how people in different countries viewed Dallas, because it was seen. And it was consumed very differently, and the constructs done around it were in very different kinds of ways. So similarly, I think we're at the very beginning, at the dawn of understanding that there's also, not that television is going to remains powerful, but as audiences also go through this process that Kevin is describing, maybe they'll also kind of create a new way of kind of understanding what this art form becomes.
Very interesting, very interesting. Kevin, do you have any comments on what's been brought up, especially this whole idea of art form, but also time and location?
Well, I mean, you know, I spent a lot of my time in technology, startup land, whatever, and like 4 out of 5 startups right now, they'll come in and they'll pitch like, okay, the future of, you know, cell phone, whatever, is we're going to start providing for like real-time interaction. You know, like this is going to be about like, it's going to be about like how to assemble people quickly. And whenever we hear about that, I'm always like, yeah, but there is a real-time technology that's been around for like 60 years. It's called television, right? You know, and it's like it was its power, which got lost somewhere or was underexploited in a way, was that it got a lot of people to do the same thing at the same time. It just never had a way to capitalize on that group attention. And I just think that, like, I think understanding the power of synchronous engagement around something is just, I just think there's a lot left to do there. There's a reason that when Xbox launched, it launched again as Xbox Live, and there's a reason that YouTube spent all this money to create YouTube Live. Like there's a value just in being in the room somehow with people. That's why, for example, we're here, right? So. That.
What do broadcasters have to do? Obviously, these broadcasters quite understand how this whole new world will work. But in general, all of your perspectives, how do broadcasters have to think about this new power of synchronous engagement? What do they have to change to make that happen?
As an independent producer, I would never dream of telling a broadcaster what to do.
Well, I don't know if I should say that, but they have to understand they're not the boss anymore. Which is for me. If
I don't know this man. Any broadcasters in the room? I don't know this man.
No, what I mean is that obviously, if you talk about connected TV, if you talk about the second screen, then you're beginning to know that you have to question here. Who's the boss of what you see on your screen or the way you interact? Is it the broadcaster, the producer, or is it the audience? Obviously, the audience is taking the power. And if we want really to, to promote things and to do real connected TV, if we want the audience to engage with or through our programs, we had to let them be the boss. The second question within the first screen, second screen question is, who is the boss of the screen? If you focus on the first screen application whatsoever, then you say that somebody in the family is the boss of the screen. If you focus on the second screen application or second screen interaction, you say that everybody can be the boss of the screen within the family, because everybody can interact in a different way, share the program in a different way, engage through or with the program in a different way within their personal second screen. And so what broadcasters have, at my point of view, to think is that they are approaching an open system here, not a closed system where they own all the power, but an open system where the audience has the power, that within the family, within the audience, the power is shared among people. And if you do understand that, I guess you're ready for connected TV.
Well, I come from Canada, and just to clarify a point, the National Film Board is not a broadcaster. It's an oddity in the world. It's a public sector producer and distributor. It's a studio funded by taxpayers, essentially, which drives us to think about always trying to do things that the private sector cannot, and experiment and innovate. Now, in the broadcast sphere in Canada, because it has been a very protected, closed sphere in many ways, their attitude has tended to be very querulous towards audiences, and it was like, how dare an audience want to kind of do things like download things? How dare they want to don't they know that what we deliver to them is good and they should just accept that? So, they haven't even got to the point, beyond that point of trying to understand audience demand simply in terms of the programming and shifting and getting it where they want, to kind of then take a leap to what you're talking about, Kevin, is probably way too far for them at this point to go, because they're still struggling to say, essentially, how are we going to protect what have been very traditional and incredibly lucrative revenue sources?
Yep,
Just in one word, I understand very well that for broadcasters, this is a leap of faith. It's a real leap of faith, and everybody is afraid about it. But I think we have no choice.
Gary?
I think broadcasters and producers have to ask themselves the question, when they talk about engagement, or two questions. When they talk about engagement, are they with the content, are they understanding that engagement is not with them, but audience to audience? And if they understand that, the question then is, what are you going to do with that engagement? Is it enough, or can you do anything with that engagement? Is it enough to give the audience platforms, which would be, I think, a perfectly coherent intellectual argument. It's enough to give platforms, audiences, the platforms to engage through, like Starling. You might say that that's enough. So I'm a broadcaster, I'm a producer, I'm in the business of enabling audiences to communicate with each other, to create meaning around what I do. And I can go as far as technology will take me to make that happen. Or am I going to try and find some way, which would be, I guess, most broadcasters and producers' position, to make money out of that communication? That's much more difficult, it seems to me. Because first of all, I'm sure you and I, Ferhan, would resist Kevin trying to make money out of what we are saying to each other.
I'd let him make some money.
No, I'm not sure.
I got up, I was speaking for
As long as there's revenue share involved.
But you understand what I say. This constant question of, which I completely understand, of making money from what we do, may be blindsiding us to the actual nature of what's going on.
Very, very good point. Kevin, what's your experience in this, what Gary said and what Tom said?
Well, okay, so I mean, if you look at how broadcasters are handling this, it's sort of along one of two poles. And so one pole is, you know what? We'll just leave it to Twitter. And so if you're Comedy Central and you're doing the Donald Trump roast, they'll just throw a bug. And by the way, there's ain't nothing wrong with this. It's powerful. All they did was just burn a bug into the lower right that had the hashtag Trump roast, and they got, like, I don't know, I'll make it up, let's say 5,000 tweets per minute, which is great if you're Twitter, right? Like, that's really, really good for Twitter. And the question is how Comedy Central is going to capture any of that value back, right? Because also, it's a question even for the audience, right? Like, what do I do with 5,000 tweets per minute, right? So if they leave it out, like, into the open ecosystem, it's very hard for them to draw any value back, right? Except that they can get some sense that people like the show. The alternative, and you see this, ABC has done some examples of this, is they say, okay, we're gonna provide people with, like, the experience to watch this show together with us and anybody else who's loaded this app onto this device that nobody has or has time to, you know. And so then there's like 100 people all watching some show together, and they've lost all the value. You know, it's like you can either lose the value in the open ecosystem, or you can lose all the value by trying to make it, you know, you can lose the value in the jungle or the zoo, right? And so the question is there a model somewhere in the middle? And I have to say this is really what we're trying to do, that says, look, there are these conversations that are happening out there. They are obviously producing value. The question is, how do you harness that value, turn it into something where you can make it better, right? The same way you can make what's happening on the first screen better. You can make what's happening on the second screen better. You can make it better for the audience. You can make it better in relationship to the show, and you can make it better for brands to support, et cetera, and where you can start to actually extract value from that. But I think it has to live somewhere in the middle, where it's not everybody doing everything, and it's not the people that we thought we controlled. It's something in the middle, and those platforms, like what we're trying to do, are out there. They're just beginning. This is a very difficult thing to sell.
Very difficult.
Right? I mean, it's.
But it's a question for Twitter too, Kevin. You say it's good for Twitter that they have the hashtag on the Comedy Central program, but the question is the same for Twitter. Now what?
That's true, and it's unclear.
So
Is that a problem in your business model, Kevin?
Yeah, the lack of clarity is a bit of a problem. Yes, yes.
But how would Gary and Kevin and Bruno, I mean, you guys actually represent an ecosystem, not necessarily complete, because Twitter should be here and Facebook should be here and so on. But that means that creating the next format would have to be done with all those elements in it, and it has to be some kind of a. I'm just not clear, Gary. Maybe you can shed a light on that. How do you tackle this difficult new design?
Well, first of all, to some extent, I'm not sure that we have to, in many cases, because to some extent the audience will take care of that engagement or that kind of conversation, and they will find they will find the platforms on which to do it, or they will have them already. The issue is, I guess, Kevin's one: are we leaving value on the table by not doing more of it? It's a very good question, Ferhan. I wouldn't know. I can only say that as somebody who's relatively, who's not a digital native but a digital migrant. I'm turning 50 this year. I have 15 years. You have 15 years room to come up with the great game that binds all platforms together and gives all audiences, no matter what their entry point, an equalized experience of what that entertainment is. And that, it seems to me, is the great mythical elephant in the room. So if you talk about the challenge for producers and format developers, of course it is to, as it always has been, to build content that people will wish to build relationships through, right, or create meaning from. But there is another bigger challenge ahead, I would guess, and that is to create a meta game that equalizes all platforms away from the dominance of television.
That's very interesting. Comments?
Well, we play in this area because we kind of, again, feeling the responsibilities of public agency to say, well, let's push boundaries. And so we've kind of put a lot of emphasis in terms of thinking of what I call this kind of, what I think of as the art and entertainment form of the 21st century, which is in terms of this, and so let's explore, let's create, let's find what that language and the grammar, and what we're finding is now as we build a critical mass of original work, and this is, and I conceive of it as niche, it's niche programming, it's not mass entertainment, and yet it's building audiences at phenomenal rates for us, and also I see the possibilities in terms of the value, because it's not about kind of saying we shouldn't extract the value, because I think we can. I think we can find the economic models, and we're starting to explore that. In our traditional business, which has been to do auteur or one-off documentaries and animation, which has been glorious in terms of the 70 years of what we've done. In traditional market terms, though, one-off docs are tanking over the last 3-4 years globally in terms of television, in terms of the ability to sell, in terms of having that kind of, which has had a decent place in the marketplace. So I look at that disappearing and I say, well, I have a business plan that actually says with this kind of exploration of new work, and we're seeing it already, we're able to replace that revenue in different ways, because doing what Gary says, instead of just kind of thinking about the models of saying being blindsided by where we were in the past, well, how do we really listen and respond to audiences? And they're living in that space in new and interesting ways, and we learn as much from them, and that builds and helps to develop all of this new kind of interesting work.
Right. Okay, one other question, and then we're going to move on to the third part of our session here. What's the role of technology in this whole connected entertainment world? How is technology having more and more of an increasing role?
Can I say something? I mean, it's bizarre to bring that up just simply by the fact that whether it's television or cinema, all of these forms are in a profound and intimate relationship with technology from get-go.
Yes. I mean, it sounds like a stupid question, but what I was...
It's not stupid, but there's an opaqueness about it where people say in television, say, well, they don't understand that they're dealing with technology all the time.
Yes. I mean, there's a bigger role of new interfaces, new engagement technologies that drive creativity. But there's also this danger of one technology dominating or one platform dominating. I just wanted your views on where you see the marriage of technology and creativity equalizing, or I don't know. I'm not even sure what I'm asking, but maybe you understand what I'm asking.
I think you'll find in the history of mass media that no technology, no mass medium technology has ever made another one obsolete.
Right.
It's just a question of, is Twitter a mass medium technology, or is the internet a mass medium technology? And I would argue that most of these platforms that ride on broadband internet delivery, or on the growth of the mobile web, are transitory things. Sorry, Twitter.
So actually, perfect lead into the next one. Facebook and Twitter have become like ubiquitous, like pencil. I mean, people are tweeting, people are Facebooking. It's just like internet is totally ubiquitous. So what's the next ubiquitous thing that might come? Is it the cloud, or is it what is the next thing in connected entertainment that might change the next level of, bring us to the next level? Bruno?
If I knew, wouldn't be here, I guess.
You'd be working on it.
Yeah, I would be in front of a venture capitalist. No, but what I think, just to sum up your question, is that I firmly believe that, first, of course, technology and content are so married and tied on together that I don't know how to make the difference. But what I think is that social virality is much stronger than technological virality. I mean, Twitter is, on a technological point of view, it's just nothing. But on a social point of view, it's just everything. Right. And so, first, I think that social virality is stronger than technology virality. And the second thing is, I believe, I might be wrong, that open systems always win upon closed systems. Okay. So this is the two things I think about technology and virality, but the rest of it.
Okay. One last comment, quick comment from each of you, and then I'm going to invite the next set of speakers to give some interesting demonstrations.
Well, one of the things we talk about on some engagement and so on, I just want to bring back the point, even with as these technologies develop, and we talk a lot about the democratization of media and the ability for anyone to engage and so on. And yet at the heart, for example, even when Kevin was talking, at the heart of it still remains something that is called a creation. It's a work that is conceived of by creators. So, I mean, we've had technologies that allowed everybody to kind of create things. And I point to this thing that you had mentioned as well, which is a technology. It's called a pen. Everybody writes. Not everyone's a writer. And yet, it's a context in which we swim, which is the written word in various ways. And similarly, I think, in terms of the audiovisual sphere.
I think that truly, if technology can deliver this, what audiences are searching for and what they would adopt, and certainly what producers would adopt, is a technology that gives as much of a sense of intimacy and realness about me if I'm on a screen or if I'm sitting here in front of you. And that will require a huge change in the ability of technology to deliver random information so that you can really feel me.
Okay, one last word, Kevin?
I don't know, at breakfast this morning, a friend of mine was saying that that his friend came out in a conversation as exceptionally well informed about what was happening in Egypt, and he asked her where she was getting her news from, like how is it that she knew things that weren't obviously broadcast. And she said, well, I have 8 friends who were in Cairo at the time, and he said, well, how do you know them? And she said, Farmville. And I think that's really important. Not Farmville per se, but understanding that that's what's happening. That that's the role that Farmville, for example, is playing, is to produce these other kinds of conversations, because that is this huge amount of like potential energy that we're only beginning to figure out how to harness. So.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you all very, very much. I wish we can continue more.